There's a thing nobody tells you about foaling season. The dying is quiet. You expect noise, thrashing, screaming, some big dramatic fight. But the truth is, when a newborn is losing, it goes soft. It stops trying to lift its head. Its breath gets small and neat, like it's folding itself up to leave. And you stand there in the dark of a barn with your hands shaking and your coffee gone cold on a post, and you realize the loudest sound in the whole world is a heartbeat you can barely find. I've buried more animals than I've married people. I'm not saying that to sound hard. I'm saying it because I want you to understand exactly what kind of man was standing in that stall on the worst night of that spring. A man who already knew how this ends. A man who had the shovel picked out. What I didn't count on was the mare. Because I have seen a lot of things break in 40 years of ranching, but I had never, not once, seen a mother look death in the face and simply refuse. Not beg, not panic, refuse, like it was a bill she wasn't going to pay. Stay with me. Because that foal was smaller than a bag of feed, colder than the ground, and every ounce of experience I owned told me to let it go. I'm glad I don't always listen to myself. The first thing I remember is her scream, and I remember thinking, wrong. Not the sound itself. Mares make plenty of noise when they foal, and after enough seasons you stop flinching at it. It was the timing that was wrong. Too early in the night, too sharp, too much like a question. I was half out of my boots at the kitchen table, 41 years old that April and feeling every one of them in my knees, and I had a cold plate of eggs I'd told myself I'd finish. I didn't finish the eggs. I never did find out what happened to those eggs, come to think of it. Her name was Juniper. My wife named her back before my wife stopped being my wife, and I'd kept the name the way you keep a lot of things after somebody leaves, not because you want the reminder, but because renaming it feels like a lie you're not up to telling. Juniper was a bay, near 16, and she'd thrown 4 foals clean and easy in the years I'd had her. She was the kind of mare that made you feel competent. That's a dangerous thing on a ranch, feeling competent. It's usually right before the floor drops out. I got to the barn with the lantern swinging and my heart already up in my throat, and I knew before I even reached the stall. There's a smell to a foaling gone wrong. I won't dress it up. It's blood and something sourer underneath, something that says late, and the moment it hit me I set the lantern down slower than I needed to. The way you slow down when you already suspect the news is bad and you're not ready to make it real yet. Juniper was down. On her side, flanks heaving, her eye rolled back white and wet in the lantern light. And behind her, half in the straw, half in the world, the foal. I have to tell you, it didn't look like a horse. It looked like a mistake, like something folded up and forgotten. It was a colt, and he was small, smaller than any live foal I'd ever pulled, his legs like wet kindling and his ribs showing through a coat that hadn't even dried. There was a caul-slick sheen on him and he wasn't moving, and for a second I'm ashamed of this, but I'll say it, for a second I felt relief. Because a foal that's already gone is a grief you can survive by mourning. A foal that's fighting to die is the one that takes something out of you. Then he breathed. Just once. A little hitch of the ribs, barely there, like a hiccup, and Juniper, down and torn and past exhausted, lifted her head off the straw to look at him. I've replayed that look about 1,000 times since. I've tried to talk myself out of what I saw in it, because I'm a rancher and not a fool, and I know animals don't think the way we tell ourselves they do. But I was there and you weren't, so you'll have to take my word. That mare looked at that scrap of a colt like she had already made a decision, like the rest of us hadn't been consulted. I got down in the straw with them. Now I keep a log, have done since I was 19, when an old cattleman told me a rancher who doesn't write things down is just a man having the same disaster twice. Little green notebooks, one a year, dates and weather and which cow calved and which fence went down. It's a nervous habit more than a useful one, if I'm honest. My hand goes to my shirt pocket the way some men reach for a cigarette. That night I didn't write anything for hours. But I remember thinking, in that clinical little corner of my brain that never fully shuts up, this'll be a short entry. Colt, born 1140, didn't make dawn. I was so sure, that's the part that still gets me. I was so damn sure. The colt was cold. That was the first war. A newborn can't hold its own heat, and this one had less to hold than most, and the barn in April is no place to be born wet. His gums were pale going gray. When I got a finger in his mouth, there was no suck reflex, nothing, just cold and slack. Everything I know, everything the vet would have told me, everything the seasons had taught me, said this colt had maybe an hour, and most of that hour would be spent leaving. So I did what you do. Not because I believed it would work, because doing something is how a man keeps from screaming. I stripped off my coat and I wrapped him in it and I started rubbing. Hard. The way you rub life back into anything, friction, insistence, the animal argument that says no, not yet, not while I'm still holding you. I rubbed that colt's chest and his little sunken flanks and I talked to him and I couldn't tell you what I said. Nonsense, probably. My grandfather's Spanish, maybe, the way it comes out of me when I'm too tired to choose a language. Juniper watched. She couldn't get up, she'd torn badly, and she was shaking with it, but she watched, and every so often she'd stretch her neck out as far as it would go and nose the air toward him, and let out this low sound. Not a whinny. Lower. A sound I'd never heard a horse make and haven't since. And here's where it turns the first time. I got some warmth into him. His breathing steadied, still shallow, still that neat little folding up rhythm I hated, but steadier. And I thought, okay, maybe. I got the colostrum from the fridge in the tack room, the frozen bag I keep for exactly this. Thawed it fast in a bucket of hot water with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, and I got a few milliliters into him with a syringe past his gums. He swallowed. First good thing. He swallowed. I let myself hope. Rookie move. 41 years old, and I let myself hope like a boy. Because that's when Juniper tried to stand. She shouldn't have. She was in no shape. But that colt was 3 feet from her and she couldn't reach him lying down, and something in her would not tolerate that distance. She heaved herself up on the front end. Hindquarters still down, and the effort of it, I watched something tear worse. I watched it in her eyes. And she made that low sound again and dragged herself, actually dragged herself until her muzzle could reach him. And she started to lick him, cleaning him. The thing she was built to do, the thing her body was too broken to have done on its own. I should have been managing her. Bleeding mare, that's an emergency of its own. But I couldn't move. Because I was watching a creature spend the last of herself on a colt that every reasonable person in that barn, meaning me, had already written off. I called the vet. Course I called the vet. Doc Ray's an hour out on a good road, and it was not a good road, and it was the middle of the night. She picked up on the 4th ring with her voice thick from sleep, and she listened to me lay it out, the size of him, the cold, the mare tearing, and she was quiet for a second, and then she said the thing I already knew she'd say. She said, "You know what I'm going to tell you." And I said, "Tell me anyway." And she told me. She said a foal that size, born that early, that cold, with no suck, the numbers are bad. She said even if he lived through the night, a foal like that often has something wrong on the inside you can't see, something that was wrong before he was ever born that made him come early and small. She said sometimes the kindest thing. She didn't finish it. She didn't have to. I've said that sentence to other people. Sometimes the kindest thing. I hate that sentence. I hate it more knowing how often it's true. I looked at the colt in my coat. I looked at Juniper, half standing over him, ruining herself to clean a coat that was already clean. And I said, "Come out anyway, please." She came. Now I want to be honest with you about that hour I waited, because a lot of stories skip this part and go straight to the good news, and I think that's a lie by omission. That hour was the worst of it, because now I'd hoped, see, and hope makes the waiting into a torture it isn't when you've given up. I sat in that straw with a dying colt in my lap and a bleeding mare pressed against my back. She'd worked herself around until she could lie against me, which no horse of mine had ever done, and I understood without any words that she was asking me not to leave, and I watched the colt's breathing and I counted it. 15. Then 12. Then I'd lose it and my whole body would go to ice, and then I'd find it again. And I fidgeted. I always fidget. I clicked my thumbnail against my teeth till it hurt. I retied a bootlace that didn't need tying. I did all the little useless dances a man does when his hands want a job his heart can't give them. And I made a decision in that hour that I'm still not sure was mine to make. Because at one point the colt went so still and stayed so still that I thought it was over. And the merciful thing, the thing Doc Ray's had almost said, was right there in my truck, in a locked box, and I knew exactly how to use it. I had used it. On the old dog 2 winters back. On a horse with a shattered cannon bone the year before that. I know where that box is with my eyes closed. And I sat there and I thought about the colt's suffering, thought about drawing this out just because I couldn't stand to lose, thought about whether keeping him alive was for him or for me. And I started to get up to go get the box. And Juniper, I swear this on anything you want, Juniper put her head across my legs, pinned me. Not hard, she didn't have hard left in her, but deliberate. And she looked at me, and I sat back down. I don't offer that as proof of anything. I'm not telling you the horse knew what was in the truck. I'm telling you what happened, and I'm telling you that I sat back down, and that when Doc Ray's headlights finally came bouncing up the drive at close to 2 in the morning, the colt was still breathing, and I had not gone to get the box. Doc Ray's is not a sentimental woman. That's why I trust her. She came into that stall with her bag and her flat, tired eyes, and she got down and she went over that colt with her hands and her stethoscope, and she was quiet a long time, and I stood back against the wall with my heart doing something painful, and Juniper watched her the way she'd watched me, that terrible patient attention. And finally Doc sat back on her heels, and she pushed her hair off her face, and she looked up at me and she said, "Well." Just that, well. I said, "Well, what?" And she said, "His heart's a mess and he's weaker than he's got any business surviving." She paused, "And it's still going." She stood up. She wiped her hands on her jeans, and she looked at that mare, at Juniper, torn open and refusing to lie all the way down, keeping her broken body curved around her colt like a wall, and something moved across Doc's face that I don't have a name for. She said, "I've seen mares give up on foals half this sick," she said. "I've seen them walk away." She looked at Juniper a long moment. She said, quiet, almost to herself, "This one's not going to walk away, is she?" It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. I said, "No, she's not." And Doc Ray's let out a long breath and set her bag back down and rolled up her sleeves and said, "Then I guess we're not either." I wrote that in the log. Later, when the sun was coming up gray through the barn's east gap and we still didn't know how it would end, I wrote the date and the weather, and then under it, in a hand that wasn't very steady, I wrote just the one line. "She's not going to walk away." And I want to tell you the colt was fine after that. I want to give you that. But the night wasn't done with us, and neither was the mare, and the hardest choice was still hours off. The one where I'd have to decide which of the 2 of them I could afford to lose. But that comes in the second part. For now I'll leave you where I was, kneeling in bloody straw at 4 in the morning next to a vet who'd stopped talking about kindness, watching a colt no bigger than a feed sack take one breath after another for no reason anyone could point to. Held there, all of it, the colt, the vet, and me, by a mare who had simply, quietly, decided that not tonight was a complete answer to the whole wide question of death. I've been a lot of things in my life. That night I found out I could be a man who stays. By dawn I thought the war was won. That was my second mistake of the night, and it was a worse one than hopping, because this time I should have known better. The colt was breathing on his own. Doc Ray's had gotten a line into him, foal that's small, the veins near invisible. She found it by feel and swore softly the whole time, and warmed fluids were going into him drop by drop, and his gums had come up from gray to a pale, arguable pink. He'd taken more colostrum. Twice he'd made a weak little rooting motion, the beginning of the instinct that says milk, mother. Live, and both times Doc and I had frozen, and looked at each other like two people afraid to say a thing out loud in case saying it broke it. Juniper was the problem now. That's the part I hadn't let myself look at square. Because a mare that tears the way she'd torn and then refuses to lie still and heal, and instead spends the whole night hauling her ruined body around to tend a foal, that mare is spending capital she doesn't have. By first light she was gray around the muzzle. Her gums, when Doc checked them, told a story I didn't want to read. She'd lost too much and she wasn't stopping to recover, and Doc got that flat look again, the professional one that comes down like a shutter when a vet's about to tell you something true. "I can treat her," Doc said, "but she's got to rest. She's got to lie down and let her body do the work. And she won't." Doc looked at the mare curled around the colt. "Every time she moves to that foal she costs herself. She's choosing him over herself, and she's going to keep choosing him until there's nothing left to choose with." And there it was, the heavy thing. The morally crooked thing that ranch life hands you at dawn when you're too tired to hold it. Because I could fix it. That was the awful part. If I took the colt out of that stall, moved him to the tack room, out of Juniper's sight and reach, then Juniper would have no reason to keep dragging herself up. She'd lie down. She'd rest. She'd have a real chance. The thing killing her wasn't the tear. It was the love, if you'll let a plain man use that word, and I could cut the love off with my own 2 hands and carry it into the next room. But a colt that sick, that new, that fragile, pulled away from his mother's warmth, from her smell, from the licking and the low sound she kept making, a colt like that might just quietly quit. Give up is a real cause of death in foals. Doc said as much. You take away the thing they're clinging to, and sometimes they stop clinging to anything. So there it was, clean as a math problem with no good answer. Keep them together and maybe lose the mare. Split them and maybe lose the colt. And me, the one with the hands, the one who had to pick. I stood in the aisle of my own barn with the light coming up, and I have never felt smaller. I'll tell you what I did, and you can judge me how you like. I went and I sat down in front of Juniper, right down in the straw so my face was level with hers, and I did a thing I'd never done, which is I talked to a horse like she could weigh what I was saying. I told her I was going to move her boy, just to the next room, just so I could put her back together. I told her she had to let me, because if she didn't there wasn't going to be anybody left to raise him. I said it plain and I said it slow, and I felt like a fool and I meant every word. And then I reached to lift the colt. She wouldn't let me. Not aggressive, she didn't have aggressive left, but she moved, dragged herself that last agonizing inch and put her body between my hands and her foal, and she looked at me. And the look was not confusion and it was not fear. The look said no. The look said you don't get to make that trade. The look said the same thing she'd been saying all night, which was that she had done her arithmetic long before I showed up with mine. And the answer was him. The answer had always been him. And my careful, sensible split-the-difference logic could go to hell. Doc Ray's was standing behind me, and she said, quiet, "She's telling you something." I said, "She's telling me she'll die for him." And Doc said, "Yeah." And then she said the thing that turned the whole night over one last time. She said, "So maybe the question isn't which one you save. Maybe it's whether you can keep her alive without moving him." I looked at her. She said, "It's not how I draw it up. It's twice the work and half the sleep, and I'd have to stay, and I've got a clinic in 4 hours. She rubbed her eyes. She looked at the mare and the colt, and she looked at me, and she made the same choice Juniper had made, the unreasonable one, the one that costs. She said, "But I've been doing this 20 years, and I have never once seen a mother fight like that one's fighting, and I'm not going to be the reason it wasn't enough." So we didn't split them. We did it the hard way. We brought the barn to her instead of taking the foal away. Heat lamps, hauled in and rigged over the both of them. Fluids for the mare, right there in the straw. I built a low wall of hay bales so she couldn't drag herself far even if she tried, so the colt was always within reach of her muzzle, and she never had to travel to him, never had to spend that terrible dragging effort again. He was just there, always there, and slowly, slowly, that let her stop moving. Let her lie down. Let her body finally start the mending it had been refusing. It took 3 days. I'm going to spare you the hour by hour because there was a lot of it, and most of it was just me and Doc, who did come back twice, driving that bad road on no sleep. Most of it was just the two of us and buckets and syringes and a thermometer and a whole lot of not talking. But I'll give you the moments that stuck. The second morning, the colt stood. He'd been trying, falling mostly, those kindling legs going every direction, the whole comic tragic business of a foal learning gravity. And the second morning he got all four under him at once and locked them and stood, wobbling for maybe 10 full seconds, and then he did the thing that undid me completely. He turned his head, found Juniper's flank, and he nursed. On his own. Latched and drank. First time. And Juniper let out a breath so long and so deep it was almost a groan, and she laid her head flat down in the straw for the first time since he was born, all the way down, finally letting go of the vigilance. Because he'd made it, see, he'd crossed the line she'd been holding him back from all this time, and she slept. She actually slept. I went outside and I stood behind the barn where nobody could see me, and I came apart for a little while. I'm not going to describe it. A man's allowed one private thing. The third day Doc pronounced them. That's the word she used, like a preacher. She went over the colt and she went over the mare and she sat back and she said, "They're going to make it." And then, because she is who she is, she added, "Probably. The colt's heart's still got a murmur I don't love, and he's going to be small his whole life, and you're going to baby him more than's good for either of you." She almost smiled. "But they're going to make it." I named him that afternoon. I don't name foals right off, as a rule. Bad luck, my grandmother would have said, and even a man who doesn't believe in luck keeps some of his grandmother's rules. But I named this one. I wrote it in the log under 3 days of terrible short entries. And I sat there with the pen a while before I could do it. And then I wrote his name, and I wrote one word after it, which was the truest word I had. I named him Rays, after the vet. She pretended to be annoyed. She was not annoyed. And the word I wrote after his name was stayed. That's the whole story, near enough. But I'll tell you one more thing, because you've come this far and you've earned the part I don't usually say out loud. That colt is 4 now. He's small. Doc was right. He never made full size, and he'll never be a working horse, and his heart still ticks a little wrong on a cold morning. He follows me around the place like a dog. And Juniper's 20 now, gray coming in over her whole face, slowed down, near the end of her working years, and the two of them are never more than a fence apart. In the evenings she stands and he leans on her, this half-grown small horse leaning on his old gray mother, and I watch them from the porch with a cold cup of coffee going colder, the way I do. And here's the thing I turn over most nights, the thing I still don't have the bottom of. I know what I would have done without her. I had the box picked out. I had the shovel. I was a man who knew how the story ended, and I was right about the numbers, and every reasonable thing I believed told me to let that colt go easy in the night. I'd have been kind. I'd have been sensible. And I'd have been wrong, and I'd never once have known it, because you don't get to see the life you talk yourself out of. She saw it. That's what I can't get past. That gray mare with her body torn open saw a life worth the whole cost of herself, when the smartest man in the barn saw a short entry in a green notebook. I keep the log up, 40 years now, and I've started leaving room at the bottom of the bad pages, the death pages, the ones where it didn't work, a little blank space under the last line. I don't always know what to write there. But every so often I think about a night in April, and a mare who wouldn't do the arithmetic the way the rest of us do it. And I look at that small horse leaning on his mother in the last of the light, and I think maybe the space is for the ones you were sure about. The ones you were sure about right up until